All right. So first things first, um, on your Blackboard site, you will find this link right underneath where it says remote instructions, where it says the drug calc workshop. When you click on that link, if you haven't already, you will see um, just uh, the information about these sections. So you can see when we're approximately meeting, the Zoom link, my email address, and then most likely your test, unless it got bumped because of the remote closures, your test is expected to be on Monday, February 23rd during your regular skills lab. A lot of times students ask me, when is my test? I will tell you, this is all I know, is that it'll be on Monday, February 23rd during your regular skills lab. So I don't know how many regular skills labs there are, or if there's only like two, like one for day, one for evening, or if there's multiple. Just know that that's when it is. It might get pushed back a week because, like I said, of the closures that we've been having. Okay, so jot that down, make a reminder. Like I said, I'm going to have at least four, maybe more review sessions where we're covering these things. And since today is going to be more like a intro plus kind of the fundamentals that you need to know to get through this test, I want to make sure that you have plenty of opportunity to look at everything. Okay, I'll cover this in just a moment. If if you are looking to get started, this is a link to a playlist that I created on YouTube from 2024. The material is still the same. I just didn't update the playlist, but there's a playlist for 2025 spring and fall, and then I'll start a 2026 spring 110 review, so you have access to that. I've also created a link here that when you click on this link, it opens up a shared OneDrive folder that is not only useful for 110, even though everything you'll pretty much need is going to be here on Blackboard, but that folder will open up and you'll see review materials for 130, the 220, 230, and the 240 dosage calc test. So every semester I do these review sessions the week before classes start because starting second semester, you take your dosage calc test during um, or week one. So all of your prep has to occur prior to that. So for those of you, you'll have the summer off and then most likely you'll see me again the week before classes start in August, and then we'll go through review these reviews for your next semester. So just giving you a heads up, and just like this, everything's going to be recorded. Everything gets put up on YouTube. That way, it's easily accessible for you and for others. All right. So couple things. So we will talk about the blueprint, but I wanted to show you just some of the other things to look at. So if you open up the drug calc practice link here, it creates this folder. So you can have like I'm going to be talking about these tips in a little bit. You could open up the practice set and you'll get a paper practice set of your test with a variety of questions. The key is right underneath. Um, the advantage of this is it's something you could print off and write on. You're going to need to have scratch paper. You will be required to write down notes while you're taking the test anyways. They're going to collect to make sure that um, that that you are writing down like how to solve these problems. There's a little bit of nuance to that statement, and I'll explain what I mean. This is a just the blueprint for all of dosage calc. So for all of your 4 semesters, you can review that. And then this is the one that you really want to spend the most time on. When you click on this practice drug calc exam, this is how your exam will look and feel when you actually take the exam on February 23rd. It will be on Blackboard. When you open this up, it will take you to the test, and then you could start answering questions. Um, it'll tell you to only put the numeric answer And then I gave a clue here, like, so if your answer is 2.5 milligrams, only type in 2.5, do not include the milligrams. And then if you have something that's a half dose, use zero point 0.5. And the reason being is when you take this, you're going to get feedback. You're not going to know the correct answer. You're just going to know that you got it right or wrong. And I'll demonstrate that. We'll have some time to kind of look at that together today too. Um, and then usually I'll go and I'll check and see what you did, and I'll say, oh, you included your units, and then you'll go, oh, okay. So all right, and then your ATI modules, there's nothing here, there's nothing to click on here, but if you go to ATI, you should be able to access some practice problems. The ATI problems, sometimes they go into the next couple of semesters, and there's some things on ATI that you're not responsible for yet. But if you can do the ATI math, you should be fine for everything that we're going to be learning throughout the entirety of the 4 semesters of nursing. All right. So I'm going to open up the blueprint real quick. And then I'm going to zoom in on the 110. There we go. Oop, there it is. All right. A little bit more. There we go. All right. So this is how the test is going to go. You will have 25 questions to answer in 1 hour. The questions will come from a variety of segments associated with the blueprint, and I'll explain each of these as we kind of go through. Um, Once you submit your test, you must get 23 out of 25 correct in order to consider it passing. So you have to get an A on the dosage calc test to consider it passing. If you miss 3 or more questions, you will need to remediate and take a retake, usually a week later. Okay. If you fail both the original and retake tests, then from what I understand, they're going to withdraw you from 110 or 120, whichever section you're in, and you'll have to repeat the class next semester. So the reason they do this is because this is supposed to be about patient safety. Um, and part of your clinical rotations is being able to, I guess, administer medications. I'm not entirely exactly sure where you are, like 110 versus all the other semesters. And so if you don't pass this, then you can't do that component of it. And so they're going to drop you from the course. You don't get dropped from, like, if you're taking other classes, you don't get dropped from other classes. They're just going to drop you from whatever the clinical component is of that. So I'm letting you know that, not to scare you and not to worry you, but mainly so that you take this seriously and that you take your time and you practice these appropriately and give yourself plenty of time to kind of go through these things, because otherwise, like I said, you could run into this situation where you are not prepared, and so we want to make sure you are in fact prepared. So we're going to go through each of these. Even though it's a Blackboard test, you still have a scratch paper. They're going to want you to write out just kind of how you solve the problem. Sometimes it's just you moved a decimal. That's perfectly fine. They just want you to write something down and see. The benefit of also doing that is if you happen to miss, more than 2 questions and you have to remediate, it's helpful to be able to look at your scratch paper to figure out where you went wrong. A lot of times when people are doing like these metric conversions, a lot of times students will move the decimal the wrong direction, or they'll make something bigger when it should have been made smaller, or they'll make something smaller when it should have been made bigger. And so it's helpful to be able to go through and do all those and have an understanding of where you messed up. Okay. Um, so the what you're gonna see is and you'll also will be able to use a basic 10 key calculator. You can't bring your own calculator. They're going to provide one for you. Just think like standard like calculator, no graphing capabilities, no memory of any sort, just a standard 10 key calculator. So when you come to practice these things, bring a calculator with you, use your computer or laptop or tablet calculator, use your phone calculator, just use the standard 10 key calculator, the same one you would use just to add and subtract, multiply and divide. You won't need to worry about doing any more advanced features, at least not yet. All right. So the first section, the first five questions or so will come from household measurements and converting between systems. What I mean is you need to know how to convert between pounds and kilograms, ounces and milliliters, um, and liters and ounces. Those are and teaspoons, tablespoons, and milliliters. If you are at Boyce, which I know none of you are, but if you're at Boyce, they actually have to learn cups, pints, quarts, and be able to convert those to ounces and to milliliters as well. So you just need to worry about going from ounces, teaspoons, tablespoons to milliliters, and vice versa, and we'll have some practice with that. Um, you statistically or historically, you haven't had to worry about the what's it called? You don't have to worry about converting like measurements, like length measurements. It's more about volumes. Then with metric conversions, this is more about, you should be able to do all the kilograms down to micrograms as far as conversions are concerned. However, your metric unit conversions typically are, can you go from milligrams to micrograms, micrograms to milligrams? Can you go from milligrams to grams, grams to milligrams? Um, and then I already mentioned pounds to kilogram. Technically, that's a household question, but they put that there in the blueprint. You're going to have an intake output calculation. What that question is going to ask you is to calculate a replacement volume for somebody who's receiving uh, fluids via tubing. And after they have voided, urinated, you want to just know how much more water to give them. And so we'll talk about how that calculation goes. At Boyce campus, they will do a fluids calculation based off of what the client or the patient might receive for like lunch. And they have to take all the different things they receive from lunch, figure out which things are liquids, and then convert it all to milliliters. Um, if there's time, I'll show you what one of those questions looks like because there's a possibility that'll get introduced to this campus at some point. But it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But just so you know how to do it, I think that's good. Oral based meds. So oral based meds, just anything you swallow. So that could be a capsule, tablet, or it can also be a liquid. Okay. These are probably the ones most nursing students are most familiar with because you've probably at some point in time had to take Tylenol, antibiotics. You maybe have kids who have taken liquid Tylenol, liquid antibiotics. You most likely have done these things, and so you kind of have an idea of how this works. But we're going to kind of look at it from the administration standpoint. You have to decipher some shorthand words like QD, BID, TID, types of words to know how much to administer either per dose or even how much to administer per day. The main reason that students miss these types of questions, the calculations for oral-based medications, is you look at the question, you go, that's easy. You answer it, without actually fully reading the question, move on to the next thing, and then you come back and you find out, oh, it wanted to know how much to give per day. Or, oh, it didn't want ml, it wanted teaspoons. Okay. Make sure you're reading those questions. Parenteral medications are are considered subcutaneous or intramuscular. These are injections. Okay. They're going to be calculated the exact same way you would calculate a liquid oral medication. And they're typically going to be in milliliters because we can't give somebody a milligram of a liquid medication because milligrams of liquid doesn't make sense. That's not how we measure liquids. We measure liquids with milliliters, and that'll start to make sense. We have a couple of reconstitution questions. The only thing a reconstitution means is that you have a medication that's available in the pharmacy and it's in a powdered state. And then at the pharmacy or in certain clinical situations, you might add water. Usually it's deionized or distilled water to the medication, shake it up, and then you can administer it. Okay, so I'm assuming it loses its potency the longer it stays in a liquid state, which is um, why it exists as it is. So the questions that you'll see will be like, we can reconstitute this medication by adding various amounts of liquid, of water to the powder, and then it'll give us a variety of strengths. And the question will usually ask, choose the strongest concentration and then deliver, and then how much would the patient receive? And so part of this is just being able to understand that it's just a nuance of the type of medication that it is. But once you see it and once you practice it a couple times, and I'll show you what to ignore, what to focus on, and then you'll be okay. And then finally, calculation of insulin dosages. So you'll have two types of questions. The first one that you'll typically see is a sliding scale insulin question. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you a table. It's going to give you, and the table will tell you a range of blood sugars and then how much insulin to administer. Then you're going to see a data point that says, your diabetic patient had a fasting blood glucose of 248, really high. How much insulin would you administer? And then you would look at the sliding scale, which is just a table, and then you would administer based off of the information. So a lot of times the answer you're putting for that question is like 4 units, 6 units, 8 units, depending on what it is. And we'll look at examples of that. The other thing it's going to ask you to add and mark syringes, and we'll have some practice with that as well. Um, the adding and marking of the syringes just means can you take two quantities, two different types of insulin, add them together, and then mark it on the syringe, and I'll show you how to do that as well. Um, and I'll also talk about the nuance of insulin. You notice that I said units. Insulin is are the medication. I'm sure there's others, but so far the only medication I'm aware of that you will have to worry about for dosage calc is measured in units. Any other injectable is going to be measured in milliliters. Okay. All right. So those are the types of questions. And like I said, there's 25. You can miss two, and then you still pass. But hopefully we'll get you through this and you'll get 100%. And that's exactly what you want to work towards. All right. So the other thing is I pulled up this is also, I just clicked on the dosage calc tips. Again, this is all on Blackboard, so you have access to all this. And in the tips, it gives you some tips. So I actually skipped a few pages. The first 2 pages I'll come back to, but I just wanted to focus on the math components, and then I'll come back to the other things. Okay. So I'm not going to read everything verbatim. Just you need to make sure you read these though. Make sure you're familiar with, The biggest thing is just what is the question asking for? The questions, once we look at a couple of these questions, they're very straightforward and they tell you exactly what to look for. How many ml would you administer? How many tablets would this patient receive per dose? How many teaspoons would this patient receive? It tells you specifically what to solve for. Okay. Later on, not this semester, you do need to make sure you're familiar with military time. So if you've served, you're probably already very well familiar. If you're not, just start getting yourself familiar because you're going to see that in reference to different things. A lot of times it'll be something like, your patient is starting on an IV at 0800. It's going to run for, 16 hours. What day time would it be, after in 16 hours? So is it going to be the same day? What time is it going to be? Is it going to be the next morning? Whatever the case may be, just make sure um, you get some practice just right at this point, just understanding military time, but you really don't need to worry about it um, for what we're doing this semester. You need to know these conversions. They will not be given to you. You're expected to know all of these conversions. Okay. You're expected to know that 1 gram is equal to 1,000 milligrams. 1 milligram is equal to 1,000 micrograms. And I wrote micrograms two different ways. Usually you're going to see it as mcg, but on certain drug labels, you'll see it look like ug. That U is the Greek symbol mu, which is just the abbreviation associated with micro. So just letting you know. Liters to milliliters, kilograms to pounds, teaspoons, tablespoons, ounces to milliliters, and then hours to minutes. Like I said, you're expected to know that. As a practice tool, practice tip, what I would recommend doing is every time you sit down to practice, and some of you might only practice maybe once a week, maybe you just practice after you review what I go over or while you're going over with me, but on a blank piece of paper, write out from memory the basic conversions. Because, like I said, they're not going to give them to you, but you're going to need them in order to solve some of the question types. Not all of them, but the first 10 questions are, do you know your conversions? So make sure you know your conversions. Common questions I get about um, students, especially when you come across some of the things, some of the answers, you might have a question about, well, when do I round? Okay. So there are specific things to round. The first thing is, and you'll see me mirror this or role model this, do not round your basic unit to unit conversions. So when you go from milligrams to grams or micrograms to milligrams, grams to milligrams, you don't round your answers. You just leave it at whatever it is. Okay. So that's kind of the one exception to the typical rounding that we'll be discussing throughout these reviews. The other thing is with rounding, rounding typically is applicable for our liquid volumes, but there are a few other times that we want to pay attention to rounding. So if I'm going from like pounds to kilograms and I get an answer that's like 55.45454545, they don't want you to write, 45 until you run out of space. They want you to round that number, and they do want you to round it to the nearest tenth. Um, if you're sitting there going like, well, it would make sense to me just to round it to the nearest whole. I agree with you, but that's not up to me. Just round to the nearest tenth. If it's a number greater than one, round to the nearest tenth for all the things excluding the your conversions, unit to unit conversions. The other thing I'll say about rounding is save your rounding to the end. Okay, that'll come more in handy later on in other sections, particularly third and fourth semester. But save your rounding to the very end. So as an example, let's say you get an answer of 1.25 milliliters. like let's say this is a parenteral or liquid oral medication, and your final answer is 1.25 milliliters, even though it's like it ends there, they want you to round that to 1.3. Okay. So you look at the five. If it's five or greater, you're going to round up the number ahead. Okay. So if it was 1.24, if it's four or fewer, you just drop that number in the hundreds place and then you just leave it at 1.2 milliliters. You probably won't do too much rounding the first test, but it gets asked. And so I like to tell you what those are. And sometimes the practice sets that I give you, I incorporate rounding, mainly to make you kind of think through it and make sure you're not just like memorizing an answer, and that you're working through the steps. If we get a volume less than 1 milliliter, so we're going to actually see examples of that with the reconstitution questions, then what we want to do is round to the nearest hundredth. Okay. So let's say in this example, this is just a bad example, like the 0.969. If I were to say, actually, hold on, I'm gonna write here. This is a better example. So let's say I have an answer that's 0.125 milliliters. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look, we want two significant numbers, and I'm going to look at this number here to tell me whether to round this to 0.13 or to just drop this last number. So if it's five or greater, we're going to round that answer to 0.13 milliliters. If that were 0.124, then we're gonna drop the four. So again, we want these two numbers here for a number less than one. We're gonna drop the four. So we look at the four, it's four or fewer. Then we're gonna put our final answer 0.12 milliliters. Okay. Excuse me. So that's how you approach rounding. You'll hear me say that as we kind of go through. What's important to know is if you get an answer, like let's say you get a final answer of 0.75, leave that alone. That's your answer. Don't round that to zero point 0.8. Leave it at 0.75 because it tells you to round to the nearest hundredths when we have a volume less than one. Okay. This question will get asked. You'll be on a future review. Someone will ask this question, and then I'll repeat it. So it'll happen. It's okay. All right. Excuse me. All right. You don't need to worry about drops yet. You do need to worry about tablets. Tablets can be scored, meaning you can give somebody a half tablet. So if the order or if the administration comes out to be where you would give somebody a half a tablet, you can give them half a tablet. Okay. But if it's a capsule, you can't give them half a capsule. Okay. You can't break a capsule in half and give them half the medication. If you've ever opened up a capsule, there's a bunch of little beads in there, and you don't know that it's 50-50. And I know that we all have like a mom, grandma, aunt, uncle who does that because they're trying to save on their pills. Uh don't do that. All right. There are some helpful equations. Most students like to use these helpful equations, such as it's either called ordered over available or desired over have. I like to use the term order over available, but you will see people use desired over have. So an example of that would be, let's say the order is 500 milligrams. You have available 250 milligram capsules. How many capsules will you administer? And then you could see how that's written out there. And I'll also demonstrate that this is just more of a linear representation of that. Um, if you have an order of 500 milligrams and then available is 250 milligrams per 5 ml, then that's how you would set up that particular type of question. And like I said, we'll go through that. You don't need to worry about flow rate and drop factor this time around. You will see that next semester, and I will talk about it, but I'm not going to talk about it today. My preferred kind of way that I explain all of these things is via dimensional analysis. Dimensional analysis is really helpful later on, like second, third, fourth semester. 110 you can get by just doing, for the most part, the ordered over available or desired over have. Okay. Just make sure you don't forget the quantity when you're doing that. These are some textbook resources if you want to look at a textbook, if you want to get these are older editions, so you might even be able to get a deal on a copy of one of these on eBay or Amazon. You may also be able to pick one up and or look at one in the library. But this is where I got a lot of the information for your dosage calc questions. All right. Last thing before we go in, you're going to hear me reference. I always forget that some of you don't know what these abbreviations mean for the most part, so you're going to hear me say them, but this is a list of some common dosage calc related or drug calc related abbreviations. And so you want to learn what these things are and what they mean, okay? Because you'll hear me say them, but just make sure you are paying attention to what those are, okay? So you're going to see these, like you're going to see PRN, you're going to see stat, you're going to see BID, TID, QD. You're going to see all those things. I got that information from this website. It was a while ago, so I don't know if it's still if it's still live, but that's where I pulled that information from. This is again the another written out version of the formulas desired over or ordered over available. And you can see they even use things like what's on hand, what's there. Don't forget your quantity. This is the big thing that a lot of students miss in 110 is that they assume that it's always times one. It is for pills, tablets, but not for liquids. Some liquids are 5, 15, 30. Like it depends. Okay. All right. So let's go back here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up so we can kind of look at some practice questions and then so you can kind of see what this would look like. And I'll go over a few and then we'll wrap up so that I'm not overwhelming you all on day one. Okay. All right. So you could take this multiple times. Okay. You can see that it gives you some instructions. The main thing is only write your numerical answer, but I'll show you what it looks like and why it gets wrong if I write the lettering. So let's proceed. So when we are doing these, oops, hold on. So when we're doing problems that involve conversions, some of you are already good at just saying, okay, I'm just going to move this over 3, and then I'm going to get an answer of 1.5, and then you're good to go. If you do it right 10% of the time and wrong 90% of the time, a lot of times it's because you don't know which way to move your decimal. So either practice learning that, or what I would recommend is just write out and then write out your conversion. So it'll look like this. You'll have 1,500 milligrams times, then you're going to set a conversion factor. Okay. The question I always ask myself is, what am I trying to get rid of? Milligrams. And what am I trying to convert it to? Grams. Now you have memorized the number of milligrams in 1 gram. So 1 gram is 1,000 milligrams. So if you ever get stuck, write it out even if you don't do it this method, but if you know that 1500 divided by 1,000, you should at least have an idea that that number is going to get smaller, not bigger. Okay. So, like I said, just kind of write it out. The only time this doesn't work properly is if you don't know these conversions. Practice them. So, 1500 divided by 1,000, and then I'm going to get 1.5. So, I would put into the answer box here 1.5. Okay. Nothing else. Now, if you let it sit there a minute, it'll auto save. Okay. You can come back, change your answer, but just know it's going to auto save. You're going to do the same thing here. So again, you can move the decimal over, or you can um or you can set up the equation if it's been a little while. Um, the way you would do this, you would take, at least the way I'm doing this, to just kind of demonstrate 250 micrograms, and then I want to convert it. So I want to get rid of micrograms. So that what that does is that cancels out, and I want to convert it to milligrams. Now this one might be one that you don't know, but 1 milligram contains 1,000 micrograms. Okay, so it's actually um, the same number of moves to the left as the previous answer. Okay, and when I do that, I'm going to get 0.25 milligrams. So again, when I get an answer like that, that's the answer. Don't round that to zero point 0.3. Don't add a zero after the 5. Keep the zero in front of the 0.25. And so you're going to put an answer of 0.25. If you got an answer that was, let's say you did this, let's say the question was we wanted to convert 125 micrograms to milligrams, you're going to get an answer of 0.125 milligrams. That is your answer. Do not round when you're doing basic metric to metric conversions. Pounds to kilograms. You're going to take the patient's weight and then set up a conversion factor. You could also just divide by 2.2. That's perfectly fine. But if you ever get stuck, sometimes it's helpful because, believe it or not, people forget where to put the 2.2. Do I multiply? Do I divide? So 1 kilogram is equal to 2.2 pounds. Now, this I need my calculator for. So I'm going to take 165 divided by 2.2. And I'm going to get an even 75. So that's all I'm going to write. If it's already even, you don't need to round it. You don't need to put 75.0. Just leave it at 75. And then just to show you what it looks like when it gets incorrect, I'm gonna purposely put in the wrong answer. And the only reason it's wrong is because I included the units. All right. So we'll do the same thing here. I'm not going to answer all these questions. I do want to see, so 117 divided by 2.2. All right. So when I do that question and I write that out, I'm going to get an answer of 53.181818. It just keeps going. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow rounding rules that say if the number is greater than 1 and we're going from household system units to the metric system units, then we're going to round. So I'm going to look at this number here, the 8. The 8 is bigger than 5. So that tells me I'm going to round up to 53.2. And then you would put your answer at 53.2. Okay. So there are a bunch of other questions here, converting milliliters to ounces. I want to leave a few of these just for you to practice. Um, so I'm not going to go through all of them today. I mainly wanted to introduce you to everything and make you feel comfortable. I'm gonna save this one for the next time I do the review. This is a little bit of a challenge. There is benefit from you struggling from it, so try and figure this one out. My clue for you is if for every time they void out 125 milliliters, you have to replace with 40, and then they actually void out 500. Am I going to replace it with more than 40 or less than 40? Okay. You don't need to answer that question, but go ahead, Wilford.
Okay. I have the question that the third one, like convert 117 pounds to kilograms. Like I did the normal conversion and I got 53.181.
Yeah, I wrote that. Yes.
Yeah, but so I'm going to write 53.18 since you said we should not count for basic calculation.
You do round when you're going from when you go between the two different units, so the US standard or the household measurements to metric or metric to household. Now you're in different systems. So you would round to the nearest tenth for that.
Okay,
Yeah. And just in general, when you go from pounds to kilograms, round to the nearest tenth.
okay,
Yeah. There are a couple of these nuance things. And like I said, I'll try and point them out as we're going through these different reviews. Um, and then just be patient with it because the unfortunate thing is there's always an exception, and I try and give you guys a little bit of a heads up of what that exception is. All right. Um, okay. You're gonna get some practice on what these labels look like. Okay. And so we're going to also be going over a number of these over the coming weeks. Like I said, today, I don't want to, I know some of you are probably like ready to like answer some questions, and you'll have that opportunity and you'll get the feedback. I'm going to show you what that looks like. Um, but what you're going to do is you want to pay attention when we're reading these questions and learning to read the labels. There's a couple things. Okay. So when it says your patient receives or the doctor orders, that is what that is, 500 milligrams. Okay. So it tells you the quantity or the amount of medication they want them to receive in the form of milligrams. Then it's going to say, because these are capsules, PO, which means per oral, so by mouth. And then BID means you're going to administer that dose twice a day. The question says, how many capsules would you give per dose? That per um if it says per dose, or if it just says how many capsules would you administer, they're asking you per dose. The only time they're going to ask you per day is if it specifically says, or when you need to calculate it per day, is when it specifically says how many capsules would you give per day. When we look at the label, we have to look at the label and kind of some of you might be familiar with looking at labels, some of you may not, so I just assume you aren't. And what you want to pay attention to is a couple of things. How is it available? So it's available as a capsule. And then what is the strength? And the strength is 250 milligrams. What you don't want to get hung up on is sometimes it'll tell you something like, oh, yeah. So let me pull this up here and let me move. Let's see if I can move these here. Okay, hold on one second. Sorry. So it comes in capsules. The strength is 250. And then it tells you in the whole bottle there's 100 capsules. Okay. This does not mean that 250 there's 250 milligrams in 100 capsules. What this does say is that there are for every capsule, one capsule. So I'm just going to write one capsule equals 250 milligrams. So when you're doing your order over available or your desired over have, the order is 500. Your available is 250 and your quantity is one capsule. And so you get an answer of two capsules. I'm just going to write caps. So this is how you would do order over available or desired over have. Okay. Pay attention to your quantity. When it's capsules, tablets, it's one. But when it's liquids, and I'll show you an example of that in just a moment, that can be different. And so you want to make sure you're paying attention to when it's different. So here I would just write my answer as two. Okay. And then I want to show you a liquid question. Actually, this one's a pretty good one. All right. So it tells us um, potassium chloride elixir, 40 milliequivalents by mouth, QID, which means 4 times a day with juice. It tells us that we have 20 milliequivalents per 15 ml available, and it wants to know how many ml to administer for one dose. And then it wants you to put that answer on the cup. Okay, so we're going to mark the cup in this example. So first we have to solve for what this is. So again, I'm going to say, I'm going to take my order. Now this time it's something weird, right? Um, yeah, I'm doing 14 right now. So so I have 40 milliequivalents is my order. Okay. Now you might be going like, what the heck's a milliequivalent? Well, that's all there was. Oh, yeah, milliequivalent is just the unit, and QID just means 4 times a day. So my order is 40 milliequivalents. Okay. So that's my order. So I'm just going to write an O next to that. My available, now this is a liquid dose, so I need to account for both those things. So my available is the 20 MEQ. And thank you, Nelly, for qualifying your question. I wasn't sure. I was like, wait, I'm doing it now. And then I'm going to multiply by my quantity, which is the 15 ml. So my order over my available times my quantity. So this is my available here. This is my quantity here. Just so we're kind of where you seeing where I'm getting these numbers from. And that's going to be 30 ml. Now, when I go to answer this particular question, it's going to ask me to drop a point. And so I'm just going to click. So some people have asked me, can I click on 30? Do I click on the 30 cc? Can I click on the line? The answer is this entire box. So it accounts for everything. So if in doubt, I would say they want you to be able to mark on your line. So just mark in the middle of your line. So it'll drop a point. Now, let's say you make a mistake where you drop it, you can actually clear it and you can put it where you actually want it to be. Okay, clear it. If you're like, "Ah, I don't like that," okay, clear it. You can put it where it needs to go, right in the middle there. Okay. So, anyways, you're gonna go through work work through all these questions. We're gonna go through these again. So if you get stuck on something, that's what I want you to ask me about. Hey, I think I got it right, or I didn't know where to go. I guessed. Those are the types of things I need to know, and I want you to kind of look at and practice going through. You'll see there's a couple of marking the cups. There's a mark the tube X. You're gonna put a drop a mark on one of these as well. Okay, I think I chose the wrong answer. Um, this one doesn't ask. Oh yeah, it does ask you to mark the syringe. So I'll just put a pointer there. This is that sliding scale question I mentioned. So it tells you your patient's blood glucose level is 200. So you're going to look at the glucose reading. You could see that 200 fits in that range. So you're going to give them 2 units. This one doesn't actually ask you um, to calculate. So you just have to choose the syringe. And then you have two answer choices. The quick and dirty of this is, remember I told you insulin is an interesting one, is that when we measure insulin, even though we could convert it to milliliters, we don't. We just choose the syringe that has units marked on it. And then if I want to be extra precise, I'm going to take the 10 and the 20 units, add them together, and I'm going to drop my pointer right at the 30 units, save my answers, and I'm going to hit submit because I didn't answer all the questions. So after you hit submit and after you answer the questions, you'll be able to look at your results. So you can see here, you converted that correctly, and you know that it's right because it gave you 1 out of 1. You did this one right. But this one was wrong. Remember, I added the kilograms. So it's not going to tell you why it's wrong. It's just going to tell you that it is. So if you're certain and confident with your math, double check that you didn't include an extra unit or you put in a leading or a lagging zero, because those are the things to kind of pay attention to. So even, and one of the things you can even do is you can go through and you can get this all like kind of situated and ready to go. So did I get this one right? Yeah, 1 out of 1. You can actually print this out and then you can practice it on paper as well. I'm not sure how it'll show up, but it is something that you could do if you wanted to. Okay. And I got this one right too. Again, you'll be able to see that you got it right because it'll say 1 out of 1. And then after you hit OK and you come out of it, if you go into your, let's see here, should be able to go to your grades. Maybe you can't. You may not have access to your grading. Um, so I would say just keep a copy, like when you go, because you're going to lose it once you're here, and I can't go back now, but you could always go back into it. So if you knew you missed a couple, I would say the biggest disadvantage you could give yourself is not practice this a few times. Practice writing out the questions, practice writing out your answers, because next semester it'll be a paper test, and I'll explain how we navigate a paper test versus the online version. But between now and the next time we connect, go ahead and practice these questions. See how many you get right. If you get them all right, you should feel a little bit confident that you're gonna that you know more than you thought. If you're getting more than half wrong or don't know how to even start to solve one, we're going to go through all of them. Okay. So the next time I'm going to connect with you guys will be next Thursday at 4 o'clock. I know that that doesn't work for everybody's schedule, so I'm trying to find that balance. And then in 2 weeks from today, I'll do another noon one since a lot of people were able to join. And if I need to add, or if I need to add more of the noontime review sessions, I will. And so I just need to make sure I have access to um, computers and things like that when we're going through. So, all right, I am going to stop recording